Running Sentences presents Thieves' Nightmare, Part 3. The Unanswered Questions. Nico sets about trying to get answers from Dominique, who isn't so forthcoming with what she knows. This is a work of fiction. Any names, characters, businesses, events, and situations within this novel story are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to real people, real situations, real events, real characters, and or fictional businesses, events, characters, situations, and so on, is purely coincidental. Copyright 2022, Michael Honnoy. All rights reserved. They steered clear of the big fishing crab boat that bobbed in the water. Then, when the vessel kept sailing onward, Dominique ordered the scientists to bring them around to the side of it. The deck was crowded with people who were all looking to get a clear view of what happened aboard this other vessel. One of the scientists had been nice enough to pick a lock from the handcuffs for Dominique, freeing her, though Nico wasn't sure if that was a good idea. He did, however, credit the scientists with being more than just people who ran around with beakers, testing things. I know you probably don't like this and think that I'm going to use this to run away, but I should get aboard that boat. Do you have a good excuse for wanting to be a part of the boarding party? I have friends aboard that crab boat. That would be a bad reason, Dominique. Most people get emotionally attached to the people they know as friends and can't deal with situations or bad things happening to them that freaks them out. Well, then you either let me go aboard or I sneak on after you, because these scientists aren't going to stop me as they are still being paid by me. He sighed as a rope line was then secured to the other boat and moored and then tied up to theirs. He couldn't really do anything but keep an eye on her. There were still many unanswered questions, and he hoped things weren't that bad aboard this vessel that it would require anything to be done to it. I'm not trusting you with any weapons, by the way. We don't have any aboard this boat, and do you really think that this boat that we're now tied to is going to be a threat to us and armed to the teeth? It seems devoid of life. Considering what we just saw happen to an island, I'm not ruling anything out anymore. Dominique conceded this point by merely nodding yes, then turned and went over to the rope, grabbing it up to begin hoisting herself up it. There were just a few feet difference between the two decks of the boats, and she was up, quick, disappearing from view. This feels vaguely familiar, me yelling at you, but, is there anything up there? Not as far as I can see. It looks calm and empty. Are you coming up? Considering all of the scientists were smart enough to say no thanks to this exploration of this boat, yeah. His hand grasped at this rope and tugged at it to make sure it was still tight. In his mind, he wondered if she would untie the rope while he climbed. It was a possibility, so he scrambled up as quickly as he could. Even with the rough textures digging into his hand, it only would take a few seconds to get up and over the side. His hand still hurt, but it wasn't as bad as he figured it was going to be. Once on his feet, Nico would look around. He was expecting Dominique to be there, yet she wasn't in sight, which was annoying. A nearby hatchway door was flapping open, and he figured she'd probably went through there. It was a possibility that it had just been opened on its own, or by one of the crew who were here, but he didn't really have much else to look at, so he went over there to see what was going on. Although as he did move towards it, he took another further look around just to see if she was out here. He could find no sign of her, so he kept heading for the door, hoping not to run into anything and that she wouldn't suddenly close him inside. He walked into what felt like a space for relaxation, or at least one that would allow one to take one's feet off of the ground for a few seconds. There were plenty of couches and a few odds and ends to help with such things. Nico's gaze fell onto a bunch of clothes that lie on one of the couches nearby. The feeling that time had grabbed up more people was the first thought springing to his mind. It turned his stomach. The people had been taken, but not the boat. Why? How? Shouldn't the boat be in the marble? Or would it be in the marble? Had the boat drifted far enough away from time to be saved? What was even going on? And where were all of these people being taken to? He knew that no answers were coming, so he moved towards the stairs, heading down. The boat, which had begun to gently rock back and forth by the time he reached the bottom of the stairs, came into a hallway as he steadied himself along one of the walls. There, at the end of this hallway, stood Dominique, looking rather pale and sickly. "What did you find?" "Half of my associate Peter. Only, the top half, with the bottom half, missing. He looked, rather like he'd been ripped in half." She further blanched and looked about ready to throw up. Nico stared at the wall he was using to steady himself and keep himself from falling over, to also keep himself from a fate of sympathetic throw-up, all because of gagging noises. Well, there was nothing further to be achieved here, was there? Not unless someone had managed to hide out somewhere aboard the ship. "Did you find anyone, or have you had time to look beyond your friends?" There was a deep pause, with heavy breaths coming from her. He waited. No need to rush a response, especially in this state from Miss Dominique. "Made my way fully around that I could, and I ran into Peter. I saw clothes, but no people, kind of like what you said in the basement." "Okay, get back to the other boat, and I'll figure out something for this vessel." "What are you going to do?" Well, I was going to, I think, send it to the bottom. No idea how to do that other than to find some inner valves and maybe twist them if I can find the right ones. I don't think having a mystery ship full of science stuff is good to have wandering out here to be discovered, unless you're okay with that. You seem to rather like the idea of keeping everything secret. She nodded and signaled towards the other end of the hallway with her hand. It was the faintest of waves, but she seemed to be doing her best. "Okay, well, there is some research in the lab that we were in. I believe there are some pumps in the engine room that might allow you to sink us or this boat. But be warned. Peter is in there." She nodded and began moving forward from down the hallway, but carefully and slowly, as she headed for a nearby door that he figured was the science lab that they had used. He was soon alone and sucked in a few deep breaths of air before headed down the hallway towards a sign that said engine room. The door to the room opened easily enough for Nico to get in. He, however, had shut his eyes, not wanting to see any bad sights. His first step in had met something wet and slippery, though it felt floor-like, maybe something over the floor. So he took several fast steps further in and hoped he was past whatever it was that he was stepping in, and briefly opened his eyes, only to slam them shut again. Nope, not past the body. And there appeared to be another one, off in the corner nearby. Nico's breath became labored as he tried to make sure he didn't smell anything. Then, with one deep breath, pushed his eyes open and looked about for anything that might be labeled pump. All he could see was the big engine and plenty of valves all about the place. Without any directions and knowing what to do, the only thing he could do was spin these. So he concentrated on these, and not looking at anything for fear of what he might wind up seeing. The hiss of noise and sound of water rushing from somewhere gave him a touch of hope that the boat was going down. He wasn't sure that this was actually the case, but when some water began splashing in from a pipe, he jumped. Not for joy, but rather out of surprise that something had actually worked. Then, in a hurry, turned and headed back for the door, trying to not look around and see these bad sights that were so prevalent in this room. The rush to the deck was a swift one, in part because Nico held his breath the entire way, and once out into the fresh air, he breathed deeply and looked about. The boat was still gently rolling on the water, but it felt calmer up here than it did down there. The question of if the boat was actually sinking from his efforts came to him. Nothing felt or looked different, and he was worried that he just turned a bunch of valves for no reason. He decided to wander towards the side of the boat, looking over the side of it to see if there was the little escape ship that they'd used to get here was still there. He hoped it was. The thought struck a deep fear in him that he'd been abandoned on what was now a sinking boat in the middle of nowhere by Dominique and the scientists. He could not see their little escape vessel, and his heart rate quickened. "What are you doing?" The voice caught him off guard, and he swung about to see Dominique. She held a box in her hands that seemed to be barely held on to. Looking about for the escape boat, I opened all the valves, and I don't know what it did, but something happened. "The boat's on the other side, dummy." She went over to him, dropped the box in his hand, and he grabbed a hold of it, and then followed her over to the other side of the boat. Over the side she went, climbing back down the rope, and while he stood there unsure of what to do. Eventually she signaled for him to drop the box down. He did so, and it landed with a rather satisfying thud on the deck of this escape boat. That was quickly swarmed over by the scientists who carried it away. He stopped himself from also jumping over, because there was no room to do so with all of these scientists gathered around the box. "Dominique." "Yeah, what is it?" "You gave up on the whole self-sacrificing yourself pretty quickly." Yes, well, I figured you wouldn't let me do it, so I just figured I wouldn't be able to stay aboard that sinking boat, since you wanted answers. It seemed like it would just be a waste of energy to try that avenue." He shrugged. It was true enough that he wasn't going to let her sit aboard a sinking vessel and get over the side of this now what felt like slightly lower ship, and unhitched the rope from it as he went over. Safely back down on this boat, Nico sighed. There were heavy burbles and bubbles coming from the boat next to them, along with quite a few bubbles. Their own little boat began moving away from them, giving them some space as the crab boat settled lower and lower and began sucking in water and pulling at them. The scientists moved them further away to keep safe, as Nico and Dominique stood there watching it go down, but it was taking some time. "So, Miss Dominique, what will happen now? The man who wanted to know if time could be used as energy has potentially vanished. Maybe on another boat, or maybe taken by time. Or maybe he's stuck in that marble." "Sure, but what are you going to do now aside from answer my question about all that's gone on? I want to make sure that I'm not walking into another situation where I'm apparently being sold off as an experiment." She grinned. "Well, there are plenty of people out there that know of time's potential use as an energy source. One of your fellow co-workers took off with one of my machines to grab time, remember? So whatever we do, we are going to have to be careful, because we might not have any protection anymore." That island resort owner had that much power protection abilities? He was able to scare away terrible people? "Well, he had a way with people. Much like you were tied to me through threats and cajoling, I was sort of to him." "How so?" She withdrew a bit, walking away towards the cabin area, and he looked over when she didn't respond. This was apparently a touchy subject. He let it go, though, as the engine throbbed and pushed them through the water as they began sailing away. With them underway, whoever captained the boat got them plotted towards land. Eventually a harbor would roll into view as they headed for it. The hours had been long out on the boat, and it was now rolling toward evening. Nico stayed near the bow, watching the world go by as they sailed. The cool air stiff, which felt nice against him as they cut through it. It soon slackened, though, as they entered the harbor and began turning into the driving lane of the harbor, which was odd, but he wondered where they were going to go, but he figured they were headed towards a port. But then they also didn't seem to be slowing down, which was a bit of concern to Nico. He grabbed a nearby railing that circled the boat as they continued to plow onward. He found himself worrying and fearing that the captain had been found and taken by time. Usually, these boats stick to the speed limits of the driving lane, but this one was not doing that. He did not have time to go look about as the boat then swung out of the driving lane of the harbor towards a nearby beach, and that was soon nearly upon them. With it crunching into rough, sandy rocks a few mere minutes later, well, all Nico could do was keep a hold of the railing and hold on. The boat jerked to a stop, jolting everybody about. When it all settled down, Nico let go of the railing, but then a surge of scientists eager to get away rushed past him. They would jump off the bow in droves, and he soon found himself swept up in this madness, going over the side. He would land on his feet, crunching down with the hopes that no one was about to land on him. After a few seconds passed, he stood fully upright, realizing that he'd been one of the last ones off, and no one was jumping anymore. One thing that he was happy about was that he could now feel nice, slightly solid ground under his feet, and he took the moment to just breathe. "Are you going to waste the rest of your evening away? You wanted answers, right? I can show you some." Dominique's voice pierced right through his mind, and he looked over towards her. She was now near the edge of the beach and waved him along towards the tunnel. To go and get answers, or he could run away. As appealing as running away was, there was the fear that someone else might come along and find him and try and grab him. All because, for some reason, time had not come and grabbed him away. He sighed at the thought and already began plodding towards her. Yeah, I'm coming. Through a tunnel that cut the beach from land and onto firm grounds they would go. This gave way to a dirt parking lot where a few vans stood. Nico eyed the situation carefully. He suspected that Dominique had something to do with this, but I radioed ahead to my company. They sent us some vehicles to drop us off at a safe spot. Is that okay with you? It gets me answers, right? She nodded yes. Well, then I guess I don't have a choice, unless some other terrorist organization finds out about me and swoops in to steal me. My company is not a terror organization, though we do happen to work with many people, all trying to do things to the world in different ways. Still sounds terror-like to me. They were up to one of the few open van doors, and he looked inside to see an already packed vehicle with seats taken up. He would trudge down the line of a couple of vans before finding an empty seat that he could clamber into. He stuffed himself into a seat, only to find Dominique waving her hand in his face. "Scooch over. This is the last van that has room inside." He looked over at her as she pushed him semi-out of the way, and with a sigh he moved over, giving up most of his seat. He thought about sitting on the floor in the trunk area might be a better option. The door was then closed, and the vehicle rumbled to life as they began moving a few short seconds later. The drive took some time in the dark night, and with few lights in the back roads to keep them company. The sound of snoring soon filled the vehicle and ruined Nico's half-hearted attempt to fall asleep himself. He was also having to deal with the slightly sleepy Dominique, whose sleepy head kept trying to find a spot on his shoulder to use as a pillow. Time kept ticking until a splash of bright lights from a nearby hotel came into sight. The fact that they pulled into the parking lot a few seconds later relieved Nico, who wanted out of the van. This line of vans would come to a stop, and the few souls who were still awake managed to get to the doors to get out. In Nico's jostling to get out of his van, he woke most of them. But he got out, and he found the parking lot soon filled with scientists who drifted towards the hotel entrance in search of a good bed inside. The horde of zombie, exhausted scientists came into the lobby of the hotel and were greeted by a few tables and people sitting behind these tables, handing out key cards to rooms and taking down names. Nico felt like he didn't fit in at all with this and was about to go back outside when he found himself at the front of one such table. Name? Nico Wrath. A key card was suddenly produced and handed to him. He tentatively grabbed at it. Room 304. If you need anything, feel free to call down to the desk. Nico nodded and went past the table, headed for the elevator, but those had a long line to them, so he turned for the stairs, figuring at least he had the energy for that. 3 flights of stairs, well, not a large amount, do become somewhat of a slog when one is tired and had a rather, really long day. It felt to Nico that each stair got a bit larger each time he managed to get to that next one. He would eventually wind up in the bedroom after using the keycard a few times to get the door to cooperate and let him stumble in. A fluffy, oversized bed greeted him, and he went face first into it to sweet nothingness that came to him. Fitfully, he woke up hours later, blearily looking about and noting that the harsh sun was coming in through his window. The warmth from it made getting back to sleep a bit harder, and he found himself shuffling along the fluffy duvet cover which he hadn't managed to get under in his attempt to go to sleep. Giving up on sleep, he would shuffle his way towards the bed's edge, rubbing his eyes. A nearby clock announced it to be 10 a.m. He wondered at what time he'd fallen asleep, because he did tend to be off when he got less than 6 hours of sleep. The last thing he wanted was to try and talk to Dominique when not fully capable. The thought sent a sharp pain through his head, and he headed for the door. He needed to talk to her, he needed answers, and the best thing to do was get that conversation over with as soon as possible. As he stepped near the bathroom door, however, on his little hallway towards the door to get out, he decided to do a bit of cleanup first, and maybe to fully wake up. About 30 minutes later he would emerge out into the hallway, and was instantly intercepted by a young woman, who jumped back when he stepped out the door, as she was most ready to knock on it. "Ah!" She stumbled but caught her footing. "You're Mr. Rath, correct? Assigned to room 304? "Yeah, but call me Nico. Who are you?" "Bella. I work as Dominique's assistant. She would like to see you right away if that is possible." "I was hoping to find her, so yeah, that's possible." To this, Bella nodded firmly, swirled about on her heels, and set off in a brisk pace down the hallway. But no, Nico was following her, wondering where they were going off to. They went to the elevator doors and rode them up to the top of the top floors. They would walk into a short hallway that had maybe 30 feet total between 2 doors on either side of it, and at each end stood a doorway marked with its own number. Bella turned to the right and headed towards the one marked 801. "I should warn you that the miss is in an unusual mood today, and demanded to see you right away." He wondered what that might entail, and how it was different from what he knew. His mind admitted that he had no basis or way of measuring such an idea. "Okay, well, I'm sure it'll be fine. Potentially, maybe. Probably not." This earned him a worried look, which lasted for more than a few seconds, as they went up to room 801. Bella knocked on the door with a few short raps, then took in a deep breath. "Okay, it will be okay. Just need to be ready for what's to come." Nico figured that the little pep talk wasn't for him, and had to wonder how bad things had gotten in a few short hours that it was needed. They walked into a calm room that looked picturesque and undisturbed by a human living in it. Nico wandered a bit further in, but the woman who'd shown him in instantly backed out and was gone. He shrugged and looked further about, then began heading for the couch, as the bedroom door, which was to his right, was thrown open, and out strolled Dominique. Nico would do his best to control himself and not stare, but Miss Dominique was wearing little other than a thin, see-through lace chemise, under which was nothing. He decided to look out the window as a good idea, since the sight was a nice one, but it was rather distracting to see. "Do you have a problem with bodies, Mr. Nico?" "No, why do you ask?" His stare outside the window intensified. It was rude to stare, no matter how attractive one's body might be. But staring out a window at a sight, well, that wasn't rude. I think you know why I'm asking, and anyway, it is just a body that I have. Shouldn't we all move past that since we're adults and have mostly seen the other sex naked already? Sure, we can move past that. He did not stop staring out the window, and she shook her head at him and then went over to sit down at the couch. Then on to the information you wanted to know. I work as a mediator for companies getting them things that they need and other things. They need something, I work to get it for them, information, products, so on and so forth, that potentially should not be gotten, potentially could be gotten. Anyway, I was hired by the owner of the island to track down information on what was in that house that we visited. And how did that lead you to stealing time? Well, it didn't originally. We were just trying to find out and researching what was going on with it and why it was such a big deal. Then, along with our research, we discovered the theories and began working with people who had similar ideas to see that potentially it wasn't ghosts, and maybe it was, but we had to find out for sure. At some point, someone suggested that it was time and that it could be used as a way to power the world. Not exactly sure who, but I am pretty sure that it came from the island owners group. So being the good researchers that we were, we found a way to try and do that. And then we decided we wanted to do a safer experiment, and that's where you and your former associates, once we'd gathered the right tools. Okay, and what does that leave me as? You said that people might potentially want me or come after me since time did not take me. And if I'm being honest, it seems like you might suffer the same fate. Time didn't steal you from the house, and you were pretty close to it. Finally, having broken his glance out the window, he took a look over at her. He caught a blanched look on her face, and then looked away again. He would decide he would take a walk around this room and look at the nice art pieces that were tastefully placed about the place instead of over at her. An issue to deal with when I figure out if anyone is going to be chasing after us, which, now that I say out loud, seems on the likely side since one of our people did escape with a clock. The piece of art he was staring at was a cardboard statue of some abstract nature, and he lost all interest in it. Clock? Something about this tickled his mind, and now he had to face her. You used time against itself to capture it? Yes, we did. Did calling it a clock give it away? He watched her as she tilted her head to the side in a cute sort of manner. He wasn't sure this suited her, but it was what she was doing. Yeah, and just an idea, but maybe it's why time is attacking, though. I mean, I know it sounds mad to say that, considering no one thinks time can do anything aside from go onward and on. Oh, it is definitely because of that. It is, after all, the only way to get time to be of any use to us. We have found that once time is in a state of anger and fury and rage and whatever it is that it is being, that converts to energy, which in turn can be captured, all because it is no longer just drifting past us at a slow yet fast rate. That's what my research team and the scientists have discovered. He finally looked away again, having found himself staring a bit, and he decided moving about the room might help himself think and not stare. So time attacks, because it had been moved to a new energy state. His mind tried to consider this and its thoughts and what it was shouting out loud in his head. But what about the house? Hadn't it just taken people? What happened there? It shouldn't have been angry, should it? It was a matter he would have to figure out at some point, because he wasn't sure there was a good answer from anywhere in his mind. And so far, Dominique had given answers, but they weren't great ones at explaining things. Okay, putting that aside, who else might be after this energy or your technology? Well, the two main parties who I know about are a corporation known as Particle Trail Corp. And the bad man Hunter Lewis. Nico stopped strolling about, scratched his face, and looked around. Neither of those names sounded familiar to him. I don't think I've heard of them. Which is what they want. Lewis runs all sorts of grey businesses that operate out on the ocean of no man's land. His job is similar to mine. Find stuff and get it to whoever is willing to pay for it. I, however, don't do grey jobs as much as he do, or go for those black market jobs that he does. Angering time wasn't a black market or grey market job. I can see how one would think that, but it was considered research about how time might act. I know research can go off the deep end and be bad, a la some horror stories about monsters, but in this case it wasn't really doing anything bad, it was just seeing how things acted and reacted. Nico paused, realizing that despite moving about the room, he'd been staring at her again. She seemed undisturbed, but it did feel wrong to stare, and so he would look away again. A job is a job, I guess. I guess I can't complain much when I steal so that others can live. Then again, fuck that. This is madness. And what about the Particle Trail Corporation? I mean, you said that name. How bad are they? Standard operating defense contractors. They have their hands in every businesses and have bought out more than their fair share of ones to get technology and other products. They have a public-facing name, and the one that controls them is the name I gave you. You get the picture, though. I suppose so. Who is the bigger threat to me being alive, then? She got up from the couch, and he had to look over as she went towards her bedroom. That, unfortunately, will require a bit of work to find out, and we will have to go out to get it. She cast a look over at him, studying him up and down. The clothes from the island which the scientist had given him were all he had to wear. And you will definitely need something new to wear. So return to your room, and I will have someone fetch you in an hour or so. Then they should have something a little better for you to wear. She went into her bedroom, and he stood there for a few seconds. Was he dismissed? It sounded like it, but he felt like he was never quite sure of anything lately. Plus, there had been the whole thing of Dominique being in a mood that her assistant had said, but other than the wisps of nudity through lace, she seemed like she'd always had. He decided to turn and leave. The thought of going elsewhere, maybe to see if the hotel had a gaming room or a pool or something to distract him, was a strong one. The room he'd been assigned was fine, but he had nothing to do in there other than watch TV. He wasn't terribly keen on that, since it was either premium channels showing older shows or the news to watch. And the news always seemed to be on this everything is going to hell and it's going to burn to the ground and everything is terrible and you're about to die bent. That seemed to get them the most views sort of news. Oddly enough, he found himself watching the news to see if there was any mention of a disappearing island. While it played in the background, he paced about the small room from the doorway to the window and back again. He was trying to think about all that had gone on, but he was getting nowhere, and what snippets of the news that came through to him said nothing about an island. His reverie was broken through by a knock on the door. He bounded over towards it so that he could open it. A finely tailored man in the crispest of suits stood before him. You are the subject who needs some clothes? Yes. I see. Let's step aside and we shall get this done. Nico did as ordered, and this man strolled in, followed by another, though the other one was rolling a cart of clothes into the room. Nico was also grabbed by this first man and pulled out of the way into the center of the room so that the cart could come in easily. Well, Mr. Rath, if I have that correctly, I am Donovan, your tailor who will suit you up to a T, but you need to be in your underwear, so if you would be so kind. Nico awkwardly undressed himself, but did it at no speed whatsoever. This tailor seemed to not have minded one bit, as he played with his tape measure and began looking over the pants and shirts on the cart. Once undressed, though, the man snapped to attention and quickly got through his work. Nico found his arms, neck, chest, waist, hips, and legs all done up in quick succession of measurements. Donovan then popped over towards his cart of clothes and fished out a shirt and pants, then came back to him. These should fit with a belt, and I will have more clothes tailored to your size delivered by tomorrow morning. If I survive the day. You better survive. I don't think Miss Dominique takes kindly to people dying on her. She was willing to risk my life not that long ago, and now you say she wants to keep me alive? Do you have some sort of explanation for that? Well, no, it is more or less just the way she sounded when she called me over here. From the sound of things, she just wanted me to be very careful around you. Wasn't sure of you entirely, I guess. Nico would narrow his eyes, wondering if this was because of time acting up around him. He was wondering that, and he kept staring. Was this concern real, or was it not? Just what was going on anymore? Now, if you will try on this dress shirt and pants, please just make sure they fit right, though they should. He did try them on. Though they were a bit baggy and loose, he was handed a belt to make sure that they stayed on. Donovan did a quick once around, nodding his approval, and making sure that things were right. Then the tailor and his cart, along with the assistant, were out the door. Nico was left alone with his thoughts, and standing around his room did not seem all that appealing. He made up his mind on the matter and went down to the hotel lobby, hoping that Dominique might be down there and willing to answer a few more questions. He was curious about where they were going from here, and she hadn't been forthcoming in that. Why? That bothered him, and that he didn't have a good answer also caused problems. The elevator doors slid open, and he stepped out and took a look around this now calm space. It wasn't filled with scientists this time, but rather everyday people. It felt like an actual hotel, which raised new questions in his mind. How had all of that, checking in and all of the scientists getting bedrooms, happened? With the thought firmly in mind, he found himself walking around the lobby on the lookout for Dominique, or maybe any of the scientists who would pop up. He didn't see her, so he headed for a nearby couch to sit and wait near the door. Are you going somewhere? Her voice stopped him, and he turned to see that she had somehow gotten behind him. He shook his head no. Good, then you are willing to come with me? Yeah, why wouldn't I be? Although you can explain a bit more to help ease my coming along. Dominique had already begun a brisk walk towards the exit as he kept up with her. What is it about this time? Well, the hotel last night, first off, and, how would you pull off such an event? How do you think we did it? I'm guessing your mind has gone to, we own this place so we could easily arrange things? That is not the case. We have a deal with the resort and pay good money to set aside a bunch of rooms in case of need, per se. I don't have many workers under me, but when you're in an area and money is no problem, it works itself out. They went through the exit and out into the bright, sunny morning. The limo sat in the valet spot in front of the hotel, with Dominique heading straight for it. The valet had already gone over to the door to get it open for her. She strolled straight into the car, and Nico was slowly following along. He was trying to decide how expensive it would have to be for a hotel to have rooms on standby, just in case. The thought of a lot and a holy crap a lot kept bouncing about, and now he was about to step into a limo, of all things. What for? Was it to show off? It certainly felt like an image was being portrayed by them. He sat down on the seat next to Dominique and glanced over at her. She was certainly dressed up as well, a fine silken grey dress with rose accent that fit well without being showy, he figured. This was obviously intentional, since he too felt dressed up by that tailor. I'm guessing there is something going on that you need to present yourself in such a fashion? Yes, in order to find out about how much danger we are potentially in, we need to go see a Frank Donard, the man with 1,000,001 connections. But in order to see him, you have to look the part. With the door firmly shut, as Nico settled in, the limo began to ease its way forward. Why? Well, he has a bit of a fetish for looking good and everything around him looking good. I say it is a fetish, but I'm not really sure if it is or isn't. It might just be something else. Maybe he just likes it. I don't know. Nico didn't press this matter any further. Not knowing the ins and outs of everyone sometimes has its advantages. And as long as he didn't have to say anything during this so-called meeting, it was probably for the best. It would turn out fine. And so he turned and stared out the window as they drove on towards where they were going. The ride took its time as the woods around them turned into a town. Then this town was soon gone back to woods again. It cleared of the woods, and soon though they arrived in an area of rolling hills, barren of any trees or, well, much signs of life other than the long grass around them. This area was mercifully short, as the limo turned off down a dirt road. They passed the gated entrance on the dirt road with a sign that welcomed them to Donard Ranch. Here, among the many rolling green hills, were a lot of fences and horses moving about these green hills. The limo, however, drove down this long road towards a large mansion-looking space, where it came to a stop next to it. Nico instinctively reached for the door handle once he was sure that they had stopped, but a slap on his arm from Dominique stopped him. Appearances, appearances, appearances. We must wait for things to be done for us here. This trip is going to take a while, isn't it? It might, yes. A second or two had passed before someone came to the front door of the house, and then ran out it over to the vehicle. The door was opened for them with a crisp, cool quietness that was a bit odd to hear. They expected a clunky noise, but it was not there. Nico stepped out and thought about saying thank you to the person, but glanced towards Dominique. Please keep your mouth shut for now. I'll tell you when to speak. He shrugged, got fully out of the car, and then, in a moment of defiance, turned and offered his hand to help her out of the vehicle. To his surprise, she actually took it. The two would walk hand in hand towards the front door, with the person who had opened the car door rushing ahead of them to get to the house door. The house itself was a sleek, dark wooden structure that rose up out of the ground on a hill to dominate all that came near it. So why am I here if you just want me to be quiet? You wanted to learn more? Here's your chance to learn more. The front door of the house was opened inward, and the two strolled inside. A grand foyer that went from the front of the house all the way to the back greeted them. Well, it didn't really greet them, it sat there in silence, but Nico took it all in. It was well lit and felt like it had miles of space to walk around in. After that sight, though, there really wasn't anything to look at, and so they followed this man who had opened doors for them as he began walking away towards another thing then. Mr. Donard eagerly awaits you, Miss Dominique. He wants to know what kind of deal you're willing to make this time. Well, it is complicated, and I'm sure your master will do his best to get as much money out of it as possible. The man leading them onward nodded as they veered off to the side. Two, still holding hands, kept following him. They were soon in a kitchen area, where glass windows became doors that would lead out onto a patio area and a pool beyond that. There they could easily see a man sitting by the pool, sipping a drink, but not looking their way. The butler held up his hands. If you will wait here for a few seconds, Mr. Donald does not like to be unprepared. Dominique offered a deft nod, and the man went through to the patio pool area. They watched as Nico finally let go of her hand. There was an awkwardness to just standing there, and he wanted to look further around this open room idea of a house that seemed to have few walls supporting it all. But a wave of the butler's hand from outside drew him towards the door. Then he stopped. He had to wait for the butler, and the butler soon realized this and did his own hurrying forward. Once the door was opened for them, they stepped through the opened patio door under the careful, watchful eyes of this man who was sitting at the patio, one that Nico assumed was Mr. Donard. He didn't like the fact that he was being studied as they walked up to this man and stood before him. The feeling of being called before a principal crossed his mind in the matter. "Well, Miss Dominique, I fear you have caught me during my off time. You have some pressing matter that requires my attention of some matter, and a person who I've never met before. Your question answers itself, does it not?" The man nodded and looked them over as he reached for his drink on the nearby table. Donner's eyes kept watching them for further elaboration as he took another sip. "I see you aren't going to tell me, so what's going on this time that you can't solve, that you need me for?" "Do you remember the job I was working on the island?" The staring finally came to a stop with the man casting his head backwards to think. It took a few seconds before it came back down. "I don't know of any island job." Nico glanced towards Dominique, who didn't look towards him. She seemed calm, but his imagination was already ready to run off with whatever idea came across it. Had time twisted about things so that the island never existed, and the only people who would know about it would be them. He looked to Dominique again, but she kept face forward towards this man. "Then what about the creation of the suitcase devices?" "That I clearly remember, a device that takes time out of the air and uses it for nefarious means. So what's gone wrong then? What's wrong with them?" "Time acted up and attacked us, and barely let us escape from a situation. My problem is that I fear that someone is going to want us because we have survived, and might be a key to further exploration of time." "Key to a new energy source. Interesting. That would fetch a pretty penny and lots of people's attention. I'm guessing that it's the usual suspects then. Particle Corp and, Mr. Lewis." Plus the island owner." Dominique swiveled on Nico, angry and red. "What, we don't know if he escaped or not." "Fine." She turned back to Dominique, who seemed rather amused that she had lost control of her emotions for a flash of a second. "It is a pain when workers speak out and point out things, isn't it? They always have some annoying point to make, which you then have to concede to. And so, for the sake of thoroughness, let us add this island owner, shall we? Victor Hightower, owner of a resort, formerly an island that may or may not exist anymore. And he owns several high-returning investment funds." "Don't think I've heard of him, but maybe that's because he isn't up to something that would come across my attention now, is it?" "You will have heard of him." Donard, who'd been relaxing and drinking easily, sat up straight and was almost out of his chair, spilling the drink. "That is disturbing. I don't forget much. Why should I know him?" "Well, he operates several of your investments personally. You may now be poorer or richer if he really is gone." The man's face clouded as he jumped from his chair. "Well, we shall have to find out about that now, shan't we? Let us go discover what we should know and not know." The man stormed his way towards the open door of the patio, which was still being held open by the butler. End of Part 3 of The Thieves' Nightmare. Thank you for listening.